you miss me? I've been out of it comatose, but the depression is over.
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the weekly hobby list podcast. From me, your host, Andrew Burns, or Slow Burn from Wildfire Gaming. Uh, I really shouldn't call it weekly at this point because we continue to have these breaks between uploads, and we had another pretty sizable break this time. A lot of that was due to really just some challenging things going on with me personally in the last couple of weeks. I was sick with a pretty brutal cold or some sort of illness. Kind of cold-like symptoms, pretty pronounced. A couple weeks ago, and then we had a major death in the family after that, and I was kind of dealing with those things last weekend. But now I'm kind of behind those things, and I did want to get a podcast out this week because this is my favorite time of year traditionally, and there's a lot of things that I enjoy about this time. I enjoy the weather getting colder. I enjoy kind of the hype of football season. But and I enjoy spending time with friends and family. But I think one of my favorite things as well is just all the year-end lists and kind of reflecting on the year and just sort of putting the year in stock with previous years. And I'm excited to do that this week with the Game Awards coming out and spending time with my family watching the Game Awards, which has kind of become a tradition. Kind of seeing the big award winners there. I have another get together with my family on Wednesday that I'm looking forward to, and so I'm definitely checking that part off. But I want to scratch a little bit more of the listing itch, and so uh, today I want to focus on the music that I listened to in 2025. I know I did a podcast similar to this last year, but the difference between this year and last year is last year I went really in depth on the albums and the music that I listened to in 2024 specifically that came out that year. I actually had a top 50 songs of 2024 and a top album list of 2024. That was a lot of fun, but quite frankly, this year I really didn't listen to any modern music or music that came out in 2025. A lot of my focus was on building out contenders that were going to be potential for my list that I'm planning on doing very soon, which is my top 25 albums of all time. And then also just sort of listening to more artists that, and kind of diving deep into artists that I thought were contenders for, or were definitely going to be on my top 100 artist list, but that I might, move around, need to move up, to get more familiar with their discography. And so for some artists, I went really deep and I actually listened to every album that some artists have on Spotify today, which is not what I expected to do at the outset, but was ended up being a very interesting exercise. So today we're gonna go through and just sort of discuss the albums that I listened to in 2025. I listened to, let's see here, the end of my notes here. Listened to 84 albums in 2025, which is a pretty high number. I don't know actually how that compares to last year. Let's take a look. Oh, so it's like almost double the number of albums that I listened to in 2024. 2024, I listened to 44 albums. However, in 2024, I listened to 33 of those 44 albums were albums that were new to me. This year, that number is actually lower. So I only listened to 30 albums that were new to me out of the 84. So a lot of this was very nostalgic to me, listening to albums that I haven't listened to in a really long time. So I do want to go through that. We're going to not be able to spend very much time on each album to make this a reasonably length podcast. But I thought that it might be interesting to start with my Spotify Wrapped. Everybody's Spotify Wrapped came out this week, and just sort of catching us up on what's going on there, and then putting that in the context of the albums that I listened to this year. So, starting with my Spotify Wrapped, I listened to 25,050 minutes of music. That's pretty much where all my music listening takes place these days is Spotify. So that does basically encapsulate everything. Encapsulates all my album listening, encapsulates all my work on my top 500 songs and my top 100 artists. And also, I just listen to a lot of instrumental music while I work. And so it encapsulates that as well. It says I listen to 273 genres. If you're curious, my top five are from the bottom: rap, indie, video game music, heartland rock, and soundtrack was my number one, which is kind of poetic. Um, So that was my top five genres. My listening age number is 56. I'm kind of getting a kick out of that. So it says this is I was into music from the late 80s, the old soul. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it's very interesting because my wife is her thing was skewed because she just basically listened. She didn't listen to a whole lot of music through Spotify this year. She just kind of listened to stuff whenever we were in the car together. But she was like 70 something. My Tree Drink Sean, from Wildfire Gaming was 70 something in his age, and um, then on the other end of the spectrum, my in-laws were like 22 and 25, which I gotta kick out of. But anyway, listening age doesn't really matter. It's kind of a fun little thing. So it says I've listened to 4,262 songs this year. It's pretty good. That was something that I noticed that was very different from the way that as looking at other people's rap, very different from the way that I listen to music compared to other people in my life, where they tend to listen to the same songs over and over again. I really don't have very many repeats, and so like I think that my most listened to song is going to be like 12 times. But we'll do the little race here. I know the answer. The answer is "Romance in the Air" by Rosen, which is a song from The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. It's a cover that or it's sort of like a remix that this composer Rosen put together. So that was cool. So that was my number one, followed by and then yeah, 12 listens for that song. Um, and then it's followed for the rest of my top five. I guess from the top this time we have "Lariat" by Stephen Malkmus and the Jicks. I got a kick out of that. It's a great song. Then I have "Exodus in America," which is my favorite piece of music from the original Red Dead Redemption by Bill Elm and Woody Jackson. I have "Standing Stones" from Jeremy Soule. That's from the Skyrim soundtrack. That's very interesting. I think part of that is just like a coincidence because of my work playlist with the instrumental stuff, but uh, I do really like that song a lot as well. And then my number five was actually "Moon Music Elodie" from Coldplay, which is like a piano version of sort of like a pared down version of the beginning of their album "Moon Music" from I guess it was from last year. So I really listened to that album last year. But I've still been listening to some of my favorite stuff from that album over the course of this year. And Coldplay I had a major Coldplay rabbit hole in sort of toward the end of the year that we'll discuss here very soon. So yes, we have the top 20. Really, they give you like your top 100 songs, which is cool. It says I listened to 94 albums this year, much higher than, which is interesting because I really have only listened to 84 that I listed, but there's a few more where I think I listened to enough of the album where they decided that it counted. Basically the shuffling and listening to music that instrumental music for that I work with, and then also sometimes when my wife and I play Star Wars Villainous, which we did a podcast over, we will listen to Star Wars music. I have a master Star Wars playlist that we'll shuffle through, and I think some of that got into what it counted as listening to how many albums I listened to this year. 94 albums, it doesn't really seem like that many, but compared to a lot, like everybody else in my life, they had barely listened to any albums at all. I think the next place was like 12 or something like that. So I definitely outstripped everybody in my life by a wide margin when it came to albums. It says my top album was The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, original soundtrack by Jeremy Soule. Now, on my list, I didn't actually count that album because I didn't actually sit down and listen to it from front to back. But it says I've listened to that album for 337 minutes, which is interesting stat. So yes, my top five albums in terms of, I guess, how much time I spent listening to them is how they did this. So Skyrim was number one. Number two was Tracks by Bruce Springsteen. That's a really huge sort of a collection of unreleased songs that he did. I think he put that out in the 90s, but it encompassed music from over the course of his career. So yes, I did listen to that album. And then these next three are albums that are not on my list, but that I listen to just, shuffling around and my instrumental playlist and my Star Wars playlist. So number three was Star Wars The Acolyte. It looks like it has a volume number. Looks like it's volume one, so it's only corresponding to episodes one through four, which is kind of ridiculous. Then I have House of the Dragon season one. Actually, I haven't listened to that album all the way through, but I would like to, because the music from House of the Dragon is really fantastic, maybe even better than the music from Game of Thrones. Same composer, of course. And then number five was Andor Volume Three, corresponding with episodes 9 through 12, I guess from season one. So there you have it. That's Andor's that's a great stuff. Definitely one of my favorite shows of all time. But yeah, so those are my top albums according to Spotify. It says I streamed 250 minutes of podcasts. Well, number one was Controlled Burns. I'm a top 0.001% fan, if you can believe it. That's shame. Then we have, okay, my top artists. So it says I listened to 661 artists this year. But there were five, of course, that were my top five. It's having them do a little race right now. And it looks like actually my artist actually sort of traded spots. There was periods where it was Nobuo in the lead. There was a period where TPR was in the lead. Bruce really came close at one point in the year, but in the end, it was Nobuo Uematsu, composer for the Final Fantasy series. That was my top artist yet again this year. He was my top artist last year as well. It says I spent 1,217 minutes with him, which makes me a top 1% global fan. But my top artist from the top down, it was Nobuo. Number two was TPR, which is very normal. He's often at the top of my top artist list. Number three is Bruce Springsteen. Four is Raymond Djawadi, which is the Game of Thrones composer. And then number five is John Williams, which I was surprised by. But it makes sense because I did a lot of shuffling in the Star Wars playlist with Reagan. So that's definitely the first time and the highest that John Williams has appeared on this list. It is like the what club I'm in, which I don't really give a crap about. But it says I'm in the Cloud State Society, and I don't really give a shit about that. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of the wrap. I do want to mention though, they did this interesting thing this year where they have files where they sort of highlight specific days of listening, which is interesting. Like it has January 9th was my most nostalgic day. It says. Which is true, I guess, because it says I listened to some Black Eyed Peas. Where's the love I got a feeling and I'm a bee. I kind of vaguely remember doing that and before binging, or it says going back to ambient and chiptune soundtracks, which sounds about right. So that's throwback detour soundtrack flashbacks. It sounds about right. This is all done with AI, by the way. But I gotta say, in terms of acceptable AI usage, I do kind of get a kick out of how they put this together, as you're gonna see here in a second. It says my most energetic day was February 28th. Not really sure about that or what it means by that. It says that day I ran a relay from rap anthems to Skyrim epics and back again. Included Guns N' Roses, Kendrick Lamar, and LCD Soundsystem, and Jeremy Sewell for Skyrim. I don't know. I just listen to a variety of music, so I guess that's what they're getting at there. But it says my most diverse day was June 29th, where I zigzagged from Springsteen to synths and soft pop. So it opened with Taylor Swift and veered into Bruce Springsteen, Lana Del Rey, a parade of game soundtracks. Sounds about right. Um, but biggest music listening day is the one that I got the biggest kick out of by far. This is August 8th. I'm going to read this whole thing. It's the day that I let Star Wars soundtracks run the galaxy and Bob Seger crash the party. So overnight, I orchestrated a Star Wars marathon. John Williams, Michael Abels, and Nicholas Bertel trading themes throughout the night with cameos from game soundtracks and a brief detour to Bob Seger's Rambling Gambling Man in the evening. 562 minutes, 178 tracks, 35 artists. Your biggest music day, all under the twin suns of Tatooine and Detroit. So I really just thought that was hilarious and have shown that to various people. And then on October 5th, it says it was my repeat heavy day. Oh yes, and this was whenever I was kind of got into Fallout New Vegas late in the year, and I was putting together my character, basically building my character. And so I listened to a bunch of Fallout music from Fallout New Vegas. So I cycled through Fallout New Vegas Mojave Radio playlist that someone had made. Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Gerard Trade, repeat spins of Big Iron and Blue Moon, which is funny. Evening detour into Black Sabbath and game soundtracks, but the night belonged to old time swing and western. So that's very interesting. So I actually do get a kick out of that. I think Spotify Wrapped this year was significantly better than it has been, certainly last year, and just in recent memory. So that's how Spotify sort of lines up my year of music. But I do want to go through the albums that I listened to in over the course of the year, and a lot of the albums that I am familiar with are kind of front loaded into the year, and then I started mixing in more new albums to me in the back half of the year. But all started on January 4th. So in January, I kind of was on a Radiohead kick. So I listened to OK Computer, I listened to Ocno Talk, which was like a version of OK Computer they put out in 2017, where it had like basically a second disc of outtakes and other songs, and I really like that a lot too. Then listened to that on January 11th. Then I listened to Kid A on January 18th. On January 26th, I listened to Capricorn in Retrograde, which is a live album from John Craigie. That was kind of interesting. I think this is the second time I ever listened to that. John Craigie is this artist, this solo artist that my wife and her family are just absolutely crazy for, like literally crazy for. I've never seen anything quite like it in terms of a fandom. And I like them a lot too. Not sure that anywhere near the same degree that they do, but I was going back and listening to that year or that week, I guess. And you're gonna kind of see that I was kind of trying to listen to an album a month at this point, but it definitely ramped up to where it was a lot more than that toward the end of the year. Start of February 8th, I listened to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy by Kanye West, one of the greatest albums of all time, followed by Aquemini by Outkast, which I also really like. I don't think it's on quite on the same level, but definitely one of the all-time great rap albums. I listened to No Rain No Rose from John Craigie in February 15th, and then I went to Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar February 21st. So I was kind of trying to listen to some of the all-time great rap albums that I've listened to in the past to kind of try to figure out which one was the best. I did go with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy on top, followed by To Pimp a Butterfly, and then Aquemini, if you're curious how I'd rank those three. And then to close out February, on February 26th, I listened to Pure Comedy by Father John Misty. And if you recall, toward the end of last year, I discovered Mahash Mashana by Father John Misty, which was a 2024 release, and I was just really blown away by it. Best album I've heard, best new album I've heard in almost a decade, I would say. I would put it on the level of "Is This the Life We Really Want" by Roger Waters, which was all the way back in 2017, and I haven't heard anything near those albums in terms of like a new studio album from anyone else. So really loved that and went back and listened to Pure Comedy from 2017, which I had listened to before from Father John Misty. Definitely liked it a lot more than I did in the past, but not quite on the level of Mahash Mashana. On March 1st, I listened to Kiss Alive. That was fun. I enjoyed that. That was an album that I used to listen to a lot when I was a kid. Then I listened to Definitely Maybe by Oasis on March 5th. And then we have our first Springsteen album, first of many, on March 7th, which was Greetings from Asbury Park, which is actually Bruce Springsteen's first album. It had been a while since I'd listened to it all the way through, and so I wanted to sort of revisit it and figure out where it ranks. It definitely, his 70s output is legendary. I think literally my top three albums are probably the three albums that he did after that. So the Wild Innocent, the East Street Shuffle, which he did also in 1973, which is amazing. Same year as Greetings from Asbury Park. And then 75, he did Born to Run. 78, he did Darkness on the Edge of Town. I think those are my three favorite albums of all time. But and I don't think Greetings from Asbury Park is on that level, but still a very good album that I highly enjoyed. March 12th, I listened to The Bluest Star. It's my wife or my mom's birthday, March 12th. So I listened to The Bluest Star by Free Cake for Every Creature. Love that album. Definitely my favorite album from 2018. Number 14 was actually my first new album I listened to this year, and it was an album that I knew about and wanted to listen to for a long time, but it actually exceeded my expectations. I would now put it among my favorite albums of all time, which is Collapser by the Banner Pilot. This is also on March 12th. This is an album that I discovered actually via the Game Informer podcast, but way back in the day when it first started in 2009 and 2010. The host at that time, Matt Helgeson, would actually use real music, that was being released by various rock bands on the Minnesota scene because they were based in Minnesota. On the a podcast at the beginning of the podcast is transition music, and then at the end he would play a full song. And there was one podcast where he did music from the Banner Pilot, and I really liked it. And so every once in a while I go back and listen to those old podcasts. But I finally decided, I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm going to listen to this Banner Pilot album. I think that was while I was still working on my top 500 songs, and really, really loved it. It was an amazing album. If you're into kind of like that, the kind of aughts, punk rock, sort of like scene that you would sort of like Green Day, but really kind of more like earlier Green Day than later Green Day. We're not as polished. But a really, really great punk rock album. So really enjoyed that. Number 15, I listened to Black Sabbath 1 on March 16th. That was before Ozzy died. But really great album. Actually, of the ones that I've heard, I've only heard the first three Black Sabbath albums plus 13, which they did was their kind of their reunion album. Those are the ones I've listened all the way through. But their first album is definitely my favorite, which I think a lot of times you hear Paranoid as being highlighted as the best. But that first album is really just like 5 tracks with several of them are like ridiculously long, and they kind of incorporate multiple songs. But really love that first album. Number 16, I listened to American Idiot by Green Day, and obviously an all-time great. 17, I listened to Car Wheels on a Gravel Road by Listen Williams, and American Dream by LCD Sound System on the same day on March 29th. And that listening to that LCD Sound System album was a big one for me. Both of those albums I would put among the greats. Car Wheels on a Gravel Road is a brilliant country album, maybe the best I've ever heard. But American Dream by LCD Sound System, that was the I listened to that album before when it came out in 2017, but up to this point, that was the only LCD Sound System album I'd ever listened to all the way through, and I actually liked it more here than I ever had before. And I was like, man, I really need to listen to more of this group because they really don't have that many albums, and they came on the scene in 2005, and then they did some just a few albums over the course of that time. And then I did. So eventually I did go back and listen to all of the LCD Sound System discography, but not immediately. So next, that was in March. So going into April, I listened to the Guitar Song, which was a 2010 double album by Jamie Johnson, another contender for greatest country album. I wouldn't put it quite above Car Wheels on a Gravel Road, but just a brilliant piece of work. Then I was traveling for work, and I remember I went on a little Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen kick here. So on April 14th, I was driving to Houston. I actually listened to both The Freewheel and Bob Dylan, which was his first major album, and Letter to You by Bruce Springsteen, which was his 2020 album. I absolutely love Letter to You. I would put it on really on the same level of like some of his greatest works, like Born in the USA. I think it's an amazing album. Um, and it was fun to listen to that again. And then on April 25th, I listened to Another Side of Bob Dylan, which is actually I think the first Bob Dylan album I ever actually listened to all the way through in my life. So I've always kind of had a soft spot for that reason. Number 23, this is my last April album, April 27th. I listened to Black Holes and Revelations by Muse. That was actually when my wife was driving me to the airport because I was actually having to fly to New York that day, and that was kind of stressful. But yes, Black Holes and Revelations, great Muse album. I didn't like it quite as much this time as I did when I listened to it for the first time a few years ago, but still really good album, particularly at the first half. Went back and listened to Several Shades of Why by Jay Mascis in May 3rd. That was an album that really meant a lot to me when I first listened to it. And came out in 2011. I listened to it around that time. I think I was still in high school and I listened to it for the first time. I've talked a little bit about Jay Mascis in the past in my top 5 or top 100 artists episodes, which you can go back and check out. But yeah, that was the first album that I ever heard from him, and I think it was kind of his first major album that he did as a solo artist. So really great stuff, really great acoustic guitar work. Um, May 10th, I listened to Highway 61 Revisited by Bob Dylan. I kind of barely remember doing that. But yeah, obviously a classic album. 26, I listened to Rocks by Aerosmith, which was it often held up as their best album. I think my favorite album by Aerosmith is still actually their first one, but I do love Rocks dearly, and I love Toys in the Attic as well. They were, of course, my first favorite band, Aerosmith. May 21st, I listened to Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. I don't really remember doing that very well either, but yeah, everybody knows Rumors very well. 28 was when technically I listened to my second album I never listened to all the way through before, but that's not entirely true because it was Speak Now, which is Taylor Swift's album from 2010, which I know very well. But then this was a time I listened to her, updated Taylor's version of it from 2023, and that included, another quite a few songs actually at the end that were not on the original album, and that I enjoyed quite a bit. I was actually impressed by the albums that she left off, or the songs that she had left off. I definitely think "Speak Now" is her best work. And I was very impressed with this version of it. This is, of course, very shortly after this is when she announced that actually she ended up buying her masters. So I don't know if we're gonna even hear any more Taylor's versions, or if she even gives a crap if you listen to the Taylor's versions anymore. But I did at that time, and I actually really liked it. 29 was Back in Black by AC/DC. Back in Black, great album, no doubt, but I don't know that it's quite as good. I wouldn't hold it up in like this legendary status that like a lot of people do. It's solid B plus for sure, but I don't think I'd put it any higher than that in terms of if I was putting it on a tier list. Number 30 was Historian by Lucy Dacus, another great album from 2018. 31, I listened to Use Your Illusion 2 from Guns N' Roses, which is Kind of weird. I mean, I also listened to Use Your Illusion 1 coming up, but I listened to Use Your Illusion 2 first for some reason. I think I was kind of trying to listen to some Guns N' Roses albums and figure out where they would rank for me, which is definitely a list that I'll do on the podcast at some point, since I'm a big Guns N' Roses fan. 32 and 33 were the first two Distant Worlds albums from Nobuo Uematsu, Final Fantasy music. Distant Worlds 1 in particular, I think, is just truly a classic album of just amazing instrumental orchestral music, whether you're a Final Fantasy fan or not. I actually listened to them both on the same day, June 6th. Distant Worlds 2 is also really strong, but not quite on the same level as the first one. Then we have the Spaghetti Incident on June 13th. That's by Guns N' Roses. That's their big cover album with a lot of punk rock music on it. Really great stuff. Not as good as their originals, but I still really, really love that album. And then on June 14th, the next day, I listened to Use Your Illusion 1. I ended up liking Use Your Illusion 1 slightly less than Use Your Illusion 2. I think part of that is because it just has more songs on it. So it's, um, there's kind of more room for there to be a little bit more fluff on that album, which I think there is. June 22nd, listen to Rage Against the Machine's debut album. Still to this day, the only Rage Against the Machine album I've listened to all the way through, but I absolutely love it. June 24th, I listened to On a Distant Shore by Leon Russell. This in 2017, I was doing working my first job out of college, and I was listening to a lot of music because I had to commute, and then I also had to. I was working at a local newspaper at the time, and so I was, among other things, I actually delivered the papers to the various um, post offices where they could be delivered to the subscribers. It was a really small newspaper that was in a small town, this little town where I grew up in Leonard, but none of the surrounding towns actually had a paper at all, so they would just read ours. And so I would have to drive around. It was a pretty long process. It would take me better part of an afternoon to do all that. And so I listened to a lot of albums while I did that. And so I listened to a ton of albums from 2017. And one of my favorites of that year was On a Distant Shore by Leon Russell. And he actually, I think he died either before that album was released or right after it was released. He was this really not super well known solo artist that was sort of plucked from obscurity to a degree because he did this album with Elton John in like 2010, and I remember that being kind of a big deal. I was reading a lot of Rolling Stone at that time, and being aware of that album, I didn't listen to it. But On a Distant Shore is the only album I ever listened to from him, but really, really enjoy that album. 38 was Any Socialites by Always. That was on June 30th, and then also that day I listened to Contraband by Velvet Revolver. Love that album. So then going into July, I listened to Graceland by Paul Simon. That was a fun visit down memory lane. I really love that album. It's on quite a level of like, the best work from Simon and Garfunkel. It's no Bridge Over Troubled Water, for instance, but still a really, really solid album. The really unique sounds. Obviously, he made that in Africa with a lot of African artists. 41 was Sometimes I Sit and Think, Sometimes I Just Sit, the 2015 album from Courtney Barnett. That was an album that I really loved at the time. I was still in college when that came out, and I remember ranking it very highly on my top albums of 2015 for the East Texan, which is the newspaper I ran at that time, the college newspaper. But I hadn't gone back and listened to it in quite some time, and going back and listening to that was really fun. I really enjoyed that album a lot. So that was cool. And then July 10th, I listened to London Calling by The Clash, obviously a classic. And if you listen to that, then that needs no introduction. And also that day, I listened to Working on a Dream, which was the Bruce Springsteen album from 2009. That was actually, I don't know if it was the first Springsteen album I ever listened to all the way through, but it might have been because I'd heard some of his hits, but um, that album actually came out, 2009 was a big year for me, as I've talked about on the podcast in the past, where that was the year I got my iPod and was also my Rolling Stone subscription. And so I was really experimenting a lot at that time. And I listened to Working on a Dream by Bruce Springsteen all the way through at that time and really loved it. Now, I still really love it. Still think it's an amazing album. I think it's not on the level of Springsteen's best, but compared to the everyday artist, it's still a classic for sure in my mind. July 11th, I listened to Tempest by Bob Dylan. That kind of was similar, where now at this point I was very familiar with Bob Dylan before I listened to Tempest, which came out in 2012. But I remember when it came out in 2012, really listening to it right away. And I really have fond memories of listening to that with and dissecting it with my grandparents, Mamie and Pappy, who it was actually my grandmother who just died. Um, last week, and that's been really tough. We were extremely close, and really all through my life. But she was a huge Bob Dylan fan. Bob Dylan was definitely her favorite artist of all time. And I remember when Tempest came out in 2012, that was kind of the last Bob Dylan release where we were all able to really listen to it together and just enjoy it together as a family, the three of us. And we had a lot of fondness for that album. I hadn't gone back and listened to it in a long time, so it was fun to go back and revisit that. Okay, on July 16th, that was the big marathon of listening to tracks. I'm really surprised that actually I listened to that just 5 days after Tempest. I know there's no way I listened to it all in one day, but I was really listening to a lot of music at that time. And this is probably because I was just really enjoying it. Tracks is an amazing album. Bruce Springsteen obviously is my all-time favorite, and the amount of quality songs in Tracks is just unbelievable. It's amazing how good some of the stuff that he left off of albums was. 46 was The Promise by Bruce Springsteen. This is kind of a similar album to Tracks, but way more pared down, and it's really just like 2 discs worth of music. And this is specifically songs that he left off my favorite album of all time, which is Darkness on the Edge of Town. And I think that this is actually an amazing album on its own as well. Like just phenomenal music here. Definitely better consistently than Tracks. And I would say one of the greatest albums of all time, The Promise from 2010. Um, July 18th, I listened to Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel, obviously classic. 48, okay, this is interesting. July 20th, I should listen to a couple albums this day. But the first album I listened to that day was Random Access Memories, the last album from Daft Punk. This was obviously a big one when it came out in 2013. This was when I was just starting college. I was a freshman in college, and just an extremely popular album with like everybody. It won the album of the year that year from the Grammys. Like anybody gives a crap about that, but it really was everywhere. Get Lucky and all that. And I really enjoyed listening to it. It wasn't quite as good, I think, as I remembered it being, but still very, very good album. Definitely a very strong album from 2013, and an album that we all kind of remember listening to if you were, kind of plugged into what was going on with music at that time. And then later that day, I listened to "Let It Bleed" by the Rolling Stones. That was another album that I remember listening to with my grandmother, Mammy, long ago, and just sort of kind of a memorable experience of listening to that album together with Brandon as well, my brother Brandon. Great album, obviously. Kind of kicked off the golden age of the Rolling Stones, where they did that, and then they did Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street. Those are all just like absolute classics that they did almost back to back, and in fact back to back here on my albums I listened to on July 27th. I did listen to Sticky Fingers, which is really amazing album. I actually like it better than Let It Bleed. I think it's more consistent, but both just classics, A+ albums, no doubt. 51, I listened to the Live Era by Guns N' Roses. So this is their live album that they put out at the end of the 90s. That was just basically them at their peak. It's technically over the course of their era from 87 to 93, but the vast majority, I think, of the music on it is music that was um, recorded in like the User Illusion tour, a lot of 92 recordings on there. But anyway, they were an amazing live band at that time. And this is actually going back and listening to it here, as I did here to close out July. I kind of realized that really, if I was just going to listen to one Guns N' Roses album, if I was going to pick one Guns N' Roses album to keep forever, and the one that's consistently the best, it really is the Live Era, because it's almost like works like a greatest hits, except for they go a lot deeper than that, and all the performances are fantastic. Some of them are even better. I really love the version of November Rain here. I really love the version of Dust and Bones. It's really fantastic on this live version. So yeah, that was a lot of fun going back and listening to that amazing album. If you're a Guns N' Roses fan, you really should listen to it. Okay, then I had a little Kanye kick here at the beginning of August. So August 1st, I listened to The College Dropout, his first album, and then August 2nd, I listened to Late Registration, his second album. Classic albums that I doubt. Late Registration in particular is just unbelievable. It's not quite on the I don't quite put it as high as My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, but quite frankly, it's really not far off. It really is just an amazing, amazing album. And it was fun to go back and listen to that. I was really into Kanye West when I was in college. I had the person had this friend that was the editor of the East Texan before me. We we worked together not super long really in the grand scheme of how long I was at that paper, but I really look back fondly at that time where she was there. Her name was Kiana Campbell, and she loved Kanye West. She also loved I'm sorry, Nine Inch Nails. That was her second favorite, and that was cool. But yeah, Kanye West, and that was the year that this is 2012, so this is the year that it was really, I guess it was really 2013 when I was doing that. But so maybe it was the year after. Yeah, it was the year the Yeezus came out, and we were really big into that. But we were also just going back and listening to all those albums they did before that. And really Kanye West, I mean, it's kind of the perfect music, particularly those first two or three albums. Really perfect like college experience music, and it just seemed like it was really written for people that were going through college, and definitely that's what I was doing at that time. So it was extremely relatable, just amazing albums. But Late Registration, really an all-time great as well. And then that was kind of the end of me listening to albums that I grew up with, that I was familiar with. Pretty much from here on out, it was just all new stuff. And it started with uh, Out of the Box, 2014 album from Roy Battan. Roy Battan is the pianist of Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. He is my favorite member of the E Street Band outside of Bruce himself. And so I knew that he had this one album on Spotify that was just him, and I always wanted to listen to it. It wasn't really what I expected. He didn't really sound like it's all instrumental, which I did expect, but um, it was definitely a lot less produced than I expected. They almost kind of all sound like demos. But still, a lot of really cool stuff on there. A lot of really enjoyable instrumental music. Not quite in the style of what you would expect from the E Street Band, but still really solid album. Like an A minus album. Like really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I listened to it. And then on August 4th, I listened to Bruce Springsteen, the E Street Band, the Darkness Tour from '78. So this was one that I never listened to before, but it was, really was designed for me because it was they just play, the way it's lined up is they just play all of Darkness on the Edge of Town live, which is amazing. And then the second half is just songs that he wrote around that time, and then they do those live too. And it's just an amazing live album. Really up there with, it's certainly like an S tier album. It's up there with like the best live albums I've ever heard. The only reason that I wouldn't put it on, I'm not exact. I still haven't really decided how I'm going to approach it. I don't think I'm going to put it on my list of the top 25 albums of all time when I get around to that, just because I'm going to obviously have Darkness on the Edge of Town at number one. And realistically, the first half of this album is literally just Darkness on the Edge of Town again. Kind of seems like cheating. I'm already going to have a ridiculous amount of Bruce Springsteen on there anyway, so no need to really pad it out even further. But then again, like the second half of that album, which isn't Darkness on the Edge of Town, is still like one of the greatest albums I've ever heard. And so, it might need a nod just for that, just maybe a little bit lower on the list. So I'll figure that out whenever I do that list. But yeah, the Darkness Tour '78, unbelievable. This is Bruce Springsteen at the height of his powers, not the peak of his fame, which of course came later in Born in the USA. But wow, what a just an amazing album that I really loved listening to. So definitely one of the best things I listened to this year. And then this is huge right here on August 8th, which I believe is whenever I was listening to is what Spotify had highlighted as whenever I was listening to music under the Twin Suns of Tatooine and Detroit. I always knew that I needed to listen to more Bob Seger. Bob Seger is an artist that my pappy really loved, and some of the earliest footage that you could find of me, just like our family footage, is me literally sleeping, curled up with a Bob Seger album, or like the album cover. It's playing in the background, like "We Got Tonight," and it's like just kind of a ridiculous image, but so like I loved old time rock and roll when I was like a little kid. That was the first time I remember like being a fan of a specific song, and so I was like, I really need to listen to more Bob Seger, and my cousin Brett in recent years has really gotten into him. I was like, I'm just gonna listen to Bob Seger. And at first, I was just going to hit the highlights. He does not have all of his albums on Spotify, which is really annoying. They have 1969's Rambling Gambling Man, which was his first album. And then it jumps to Beautiful Loser from '75. So I'm missing out on like basically kind of his hard rocking years. Because before he was, a lot of people don't know this, before he was kind of known for like his ballads and sort of this soft edge to him. He really had was a pretty hard rocker, like more in the vein of like an Aerosmith or some of a lot of the music that was coming out at that time. It's Rolling Stones kind of even, and that's what his first album was like. Listening to it on August 8th, I was really surprised. It was like super, maybe like the least well produced album I've ever heard. Like just clear, super jarring cuts and edits. It seemed like it was just kind of haphazardly thrown together. The band is sloppy as hell. It's before he had the Silver Bullet Band, and the songwriting is also nowhere near the level of kind of what I was expecting from Bob Seger, what I know that Bob Seger is capable of. So honestly, it was I really would not say it was a very good album, but it wasn't terrible. Like you could definitely listen to it. It's a not very good album for '70s standards, or maybe it's actually came out in '69, which is like peak music time, right? So it would have been a good album for then. For today, probably pretty solid effort overall. But for that period, definitely nowhere near the level of his peers. But later that day, I actually listened to A Beautiful Loser as well. And by the time he got to Beautiful Loser in 1975, way better. Like this was definitely, I think this is kind of the beginning of his big turn to soft rock. I can't say that for sure because of Spotify, I'm not able to listen to that transition more fully because they don't have those albums on there, which is pretty annoying. But yeah, Beautiful Loser, much better album, much better album than Ramblin' Gamblin' Man. And this kicked off just a period of listening to a ton of Bob Seger. I thought I might skip the live stuff because he has a few live albums on there. Then I was looking into it. Seems like Live Bullet, which was the next album he released in 1976, was it's almost like Kiss Alive, where it was like a really important album that really sort of broke him through to the mainstream in a major way. And it makes sense listening to it. It was an amazing album. Like every song on that album is better than like any version of it is better than any like studio version he'd ever done before that. It was so tight, unbelievably great live album, one of the best I've ever heard. And so that really kicked off. I listened to like all his stuff that he has on Spotify after that, which again is not everything that he's ever done, but it's a lot of the main stuff. So 76 Night Moves, listen to August 12th. On August 13th, I listened to both Stranger in Town from 78 and Against the Wind from 1980. And I really liked yeah, what's interesting about this run of albums. So I like Live Bullet better than any of these. But then this run of albums right here, Night Moves, Stranger Town, Against the Wind. I think the song Night Moves is one of the all-time greatest songs ever written, like in the top 10 that I've ever heard. But the rest of the album actually, I didn't think was super strong. And I felt similarly about Against the Wind. I really like Against the Wind. I don't think it's on the level of Night Moves as a song. The album I think was maybe a little bit more consistent. But neither of those albums were like really big standouts, like solid B tier albums. But then Stranger in Town, I was really impressed by. Like Stranger in Town was I didn't know really what to expect on that album. Because Stranger in Town, unless I'm wrong, I don't think Stranger in Town is actually a song. I think that's just the name of the album. And yeah, that's correct. Although he does have Brave Strangers, so I guess it's sort of like a play on it. But yeah, so I never listened to that album. It did have old time rock and roll. But wow, what an album! Like that album is really fantastic. So like on the level of some of like Springsteen's best stuff. I knew I wanted to listen to Bob Seger because I know he's got some similarities with Bruce Springsteen. I knew that he wasn't going to be on the level of Bruce Springsteen, and he's not. But at his peak, he's like he can get up there like to Springsteen level territory. And wow, Stranger in Town, that was a really impressive album. Listening to it in context of the others was really shocking because it's like, I listened to Rambling Gambling Man, not that great. Beautiful Loser, really good. Live Bullet was obviously amazing. That's kind of a different category. Then it goes to Night Moves, which is really a step down, I would say, from Beautiful Loser. And then Stranger Town came out of nowhere. It was like bam, 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 like all these great songs. I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then Against the Wind, again, a step back down. And then the next album, August 14th, was A Nine Tonight, which was a live album. So we're going back to that. And so once again, like when you're doing live Bob Seger, it's gonna be awesome. But it still wasn't as good as I don't think Stranger in Town. Like Stranger in Town's it's got Hollywood Nights. It's got still the same. It's got old time rock and roll, which obviously I um am nostalgic for, but I really don't ever need to listen to that song again. It's so overplayed. But great song. But then beyond that, like we've got Tonight and Brave Strangers, and then the famous final scene. My goodness, like what a finale! Just an amazing album. So really enjoyed that. Then after Nine Tonight on August. Okay, so then I took a little bit of a break from spring from Seeger. So I was kind of Seegered out because I listened to all these in the span of a week. So August 8th, it was Rambling Game of the Man and Beautiful Loser. August 13th, it was Live Bullet. August 12th, I'm sorry, that was August 11th. August 12th, Night Moves. August 13th, I listened to both Stranger Town in Town and Against the Wind. And then August 14th, I listened to Nine Tonight. That isn't a ridiculous amount of Bob Seger packed into a week. And so I took a little bit of a break, and then the I listened to one of the few albums, one of only looks like two from here to the end of the year, where it was an album that I actually had listened to before. It was an album that I had not listened to in a really long time, and that is Perhaps You Deliver This Judgment with Greater Fear Than I Receive It from 2013 by Crusades. 2013, I kind of, it was an interesting time. This is when I was still in college, early college days, and I was obviously still reading a lot of Rolling Stone at that time, but I also was kind of trying to experiment because I kind of started to realize, well, Rolling Stone is only one outlet. Like, there's probably a lot of stuff that I'm missing. And I remember trying to experiment with other outlets, and one of them in particular was this magazine called Alternative Press. I don't know if they actually still exist or not, but it was a way worse magazine than Rolling Stone. But the music that they were highlighting was very different than the music that Rolling Stone was highlighting. And the reality is, I was struck out a lot on. I was definitely less aligned with alternative press than Rolling Stone in terms of the albums that they were really highlighting as great. I kind of disagreed with, but there were a few that they highlighted that I really did love, and one of them was this album by Crusades, which is not a well-known band at all. They're kind of in the punk, kind of a darker punk vein, um, and definitely a pretty hard rock vein. Not sort of like what you would expect from the alternative press scene, which is a little bit more on like the screamo side. Definitely none of that. Really well, not like a lot of lyrics, but well written lyrics, and it's definitely like an atheist album. I think this was a big part of, in hindsight, this is when I was becoming an atheist, was during this period of my life, just going to college and just, my brain was expanding and just learning about the world around me and how the world works. And I don't know if this album was like a huge piece of that, especially since, if you just listen to it, you can't even understand what they're saying. And they're not even saying anything super inflammatory, but it's just an album that I think is designed to kind of make you think. And it's really great music. That's the main thing. It's a fantastic album, but also like some really thoughtful lyrics that you kind of look up the lyrics and figure out what he's saying are really strong as well. So anyway, I went back and listened to that album. Hadn't listened to it in a long time and really enjoyed it. Then on October 1st, I was back to Bob Seger, and I listened to The Distance on October 1st, which I actually really enjoyed, and then Like a Rock on October 2nd, which I really enjoyed even a lot more than that. Like a Rock was another kind of classic. It's like it was almost on the level of Stranger in Town, where he stepped up, and it was like boom, this just started hitting him with Reckless Abandon, just packed with great songs, and songs that I'd never heard of before. I knew American Storm, and of course, Like a Rock, the title track. Both great songs, but like Miami, The Ring, both songs that are just like all timers that I had never heard of before. It's You is also a really classic kind of love song as well. So not all not quite on the level of Stranger in Town, but very close. Amazing album from him. October 3rd, I took a little detour because this is when The Life of a Showgirl came out by Taylor Swift, and I was like, well, I'll listen to this album. And it was the only album that I listened to this year that came out in 2025. And my thoughts on Life of a Showgirl, one of the most divisive album, maybe the most divisive album she's ever released. What do I think about Life of a Showgirl by Taylor Swift? It's a fan from the beginning and listening to her since her first album. I thought it was solid. It's basically what I can say about Life of a Showgirl. I didn't think it was just offensively bad, like a lot of people did. Do I think it's below her standard? Absolutely. Um, the songwriting is nowhere near the level of some of her best, but at the same time, it wasn't like a Midnight situation where Midnights was a weird one for me because that was an album that seemed like everybody really loved. It really kind of seemed like it sort of catapulted her to even another level of stardom at that time. And I really think that, I mean, I haven't listened to it all the way through. I've come close. And when I did listen to it, it was in the car. So it's not like the ideal place to like really absorb an album. But when I listened to Midnights, I remember thinking, wow, this is trash. This is her worst album. And like even worse than Reputation, which is down there as well. And so I feared a Midnight's level disaster. The Life of a Showgirl is not that. I think particularly the first three songs, Fate of Ophelia and Opalite in particular, were the ones that I thought were really stand out. And I thought Elizabeth Taylor was very good as well. Kind of falls off a little bit after that. I still think they're solid. Father Figure, Eldest Daughter, Ruin the Friendship. Those are solid songs. Get it Actually Romantic, which is just gosh, it's way old hat at this point. Like that should not have been on this album. It was definitely kind of embarrassing to listen to, quite frankly. A borderline bad song, I would say. One of the worst that she's ever put out. But then going into Wishless Wood, canceled Honey, and yes, Wood, the controversial Wood. People think it's ridiculous, and it is absolutely. It's not great lyricism, obviously, not great songwriting, but the music itself is quite good. I thought it's actually a pretty catchy song, so I didn't really have a big problem with that as well at all. And then Life of a Showgirl was like going to be the big finale with Sabrina Carpenter, who I've never listened to really in my life, but she's so popular right now, you can't walk out the door without seeing her, you can't open your phone without seeing her, and yeah, I thought it was pretty weak actually. Life of a Showgirl. The song. I didn't. It wasn't bad, on the level of Actually Romantic, but definitely easily one of the most forgettable songs she's ever done. It really just kind of goes to remind me that Taylor Swift is really at her best when she's by herself. Like anytime she does like a collaboration, like I remember she did that awful one with Brendan Urie on Lover. Me, I guess is what it was called. I just that was before the album actually came out. The album ended up being great. I love Lover. But that was like the bleed single, and I remember thinking, if this is what Taylor Swift is gonna sound like now, I think I'm done. Like I just thought that song was horrible. But it ended up being that album was great. I'm glad that she didn't leave with Life of a Showgirl here because that it would have been kind of similar. Where it's like, ooh, I don't know about this. But then the album ended up being a little bit better than that. Now, I saw it's like some outlets like Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone has just totally jumped the shark. I don't read Rolling Stone at all anymore. It's first of all the reason I stopped subscribing is because it was ridiculously overpriced, and I was at a point in my life where I really just didn't have time to be reading magazines. Now I do have time to be reading magazines. I read Game Informer all the time. I literally read old issues of Game Informer for fun. It's one of my hobbies, but so I easily could have Rolling Stone in my life, but it's ridiculously overpriced, and they have totally jumped the shark in terms of what they are highlighting as just that great. They gave this album 5 stars, 5 stars for the Life of a Showgirl. That is embarrassing. Once again, I want to reiterate, I do not think this is a bad album, but if you want to try to hold up this album, which is a solid B, nowhere near, it wouldn't even crack the top half of Taylor Swift's best albums, I don't think. And you're gonna try to hold this up as like one of the greatest albums. If you're giving an album 5 stars, you're saying this is one of the greatest albums of all time. I don't even. If I just think about how many albums I would give 5 stars, it's like I don't know. Maybe I would give 20 of the albums that I've ever listened to 5 stars. Like that is the rare air that I would reserve for like saying something was 5 stars. Which is what I was taught reading Rolling Stone growing up, like where it was like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. They gave that 5 stars, and it's like, well, dang, this better be unbelievable, and it was. It actually lived up to it. And like you even had like To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. They didn't even give that 5 stars. It was like 4.5. And it's like whenever you would see 4.5, you'd expect greatness. To see The Life of a Showgirl by Taylor Swift getting 5 stars is just humiliating. So anyway, big. Obviously, I have mixed feelings about that album. I think it is solid. I don't think I ever really need to listen to the vast majority of those songs ever again in my life, and that'd be perfectly fine. So that's how I felt about that album. Anyway, back to Bob Seger. On October 4th, I listened to The Fire Inside and Ride Out by Bob Seger. This is where we were kind of getting to the end. So Fire Inside was his 91 album, and then they just didn't have anything on Spotify from him until Ride Out from 2014, which was designed to be his last album. Then he ended up doing I Knew You When after that, which by the way I listened to on October 28th, and that was truly the end of my Bob Seger marathon over the started in the late summer and then kind of continued into the fall. So for these albums, they were solid. I liked The Fire Inside the best of these. I really love the title track, The Fire Inside. I think it is amazing. But there wasn't really a whole lot else on that album that really stuck out to me. And then right out there was very little that stuck out to me, I would say. And then same thing for I Knew You When from Bob Seger. So, obviously these were kind of later. He was way past his prime at this point. He wasn't at the peak of his powers, but still solid albums, definitely. I mean, like I would put every single one of those albums above The Life of a Showgirl, I can tell you that. And, you know, they're nowhere near like Bob Seger's best. So, just to put that into the context. But that was fun to like really, I had never really done that before. Well, that's not true. I think I did it with Aerosmith in the past where I just decided, I'm going to listen to every Aerosmith album, started at the beginning and just listen through them all. And I wasn't able to truly do that with Bob Seger just because I was limited by what was actually on Spotify. But from what was on there, I did just start at the top, go through them, even including the live stuff, and really enjoyed that experience. So I have definitely a newfound appreciation for Bob Seger. I absolutely love him. He's one of my favorite artists of all time. I already would have put him up there, but he definitely moved up listening to all of his stuff. So good for you, Bob Seger. Moving on now, on October 30th, I listened to Nebraska by Bruce Springsteen. And this is actually the first time I ever listened to Nebraska all the way through. I'd heard kind of the highlights from the album, but I never listened to it all the way through. And that was because I was getting ready to watch Deliver Me From Nowhere, which is the new Bruce Springsteen film, where it's a biopic. Very weird approach to a biopic because it's not like what you would expect, where it's like, oh, here's all the greatest hits of Bruce Springsteen's life, which has a lot of them. Instead, they focus on this really dark period of his life where he was writing the Nebraska album and Born in the USA, and it was coming off of The River, which was coming off of Darkness on the Edge of Town. He was like very popular, and he was about to be way more popular than it had ever been. He was about to hit his peak fame, but before he did that, he was kind of in this dark period where he wrote Nebraska, which is a acoustic album he basically recorded in his bedroom. And it's always been held up to like this legendary standard. It's just like very impressive for him to do that. It's like such a departure, and it is cool. It's a great album. I really like it a lot. I think it's nowhere near Springsteen's best, and a lot of that is just because you don't have the power of the E Street Band. The E Street Band is a huge part of why Bruce Springsteen is so good to me. But I do think he's the greatest songwriter of all time as well, and his songwriting on Nebraska is excellent. But even that, I don't think it's on the level of like Born to Run or Darkness on the Edge of Town. It's not that level of songwriting, but it is. They are great songs, and I'm glad that I listened to it, and absolutely loved that film. So that was a fun experience listening to that album and then going and seeing that film with Reagan and my cousin Brett. Then we got into the next album that I decided to marathon. Or the next artist that I decided to marathon. There wasn't much of a marathon because there's only 3 albums in a row since I'd already listened to American Dream. But I decided I'm going to do the LCD Soundsystem albums. And they kind of followed a little bit of a similar trajectory for me that Bob Seger did. I listened to that first album, their self-titled LCD Soundsystem, extremely long album, a double album. And, it was clear that they were really more of a dance, sort of like a discotheque, but weird group. And that was kind of their lane, and it was just a lot of dancey music, a lot of like long songs that were clearly designed to be listened to in a club. And I like it okay, but it really was nowhere. I didn't love it. I really was. It was way below what I was expecting. And I was like, I hear these LCD sounds and they're held in such high regard. I loved American Dream. And I was like, man, maybe American Dream was like a one hit wonder, and they were just they really because that was like their comeback album. Like maybe I just like that. I'm not a big fan of LCD Soundsystem. Wrong, because then on November 8th, the next day, I listened to Sound of Silver, and the day after that, I listened to This Is Happening, the other 2 LCD Soundsystem albums. Both of them absolute brilliant albums, particularly Sound of Silver. It's like almost frustrating because those are albums that I've known about for a long time. Sound of Silver came out in 07. This Is Happening came out in 2010. Those are both albums I knew about early on reading Rolling Stone, and I absolutely loved them. And I was like, man, I could have listened to this 15 years ago, and I would have loved it then too, probably. Now I might not have loved it as much as I love them now. They are kind of more adult albums, but wow, I mean, This Is Happening an all-timer. I'm sorry, the Sound of Silver, an all-timer. This is happening really great too. Not quite on the level of Sound of Silver, but still excellent. Some of the best music I ever heard was on both those albums. So ended up being a very worthwhile experience listening to those LCD Sound System albums, and I'm glad I did. And then my final big push, my big stretch was Coldplay. So listening to the Coldplay albums. And this was an interesting one because Coldplay, this is obviously a group that has just been around. I was telling my brother about this. He's not as big a Coldplay fan. And I haven't. There was a period in my life where I really wasn't listening to Coldplay at all. But they were always kind of there. Like go back from their first album with Yellow. It's like that was like it's such a Titanic song, and then particularly the A Rush of Blood to the Head they did in 2002 that had Clocks and The Scientist and Green Eyes. I mean, these were songs that were just so popular when I was a kid. In 2002 I would have been 8 years old, and that period of music is I'm very fond of because my mom, she really didn't listen to a lot of music. She really just listened to a lot of Christian music, and that was kind of what we grew up on. But she every once in a while she would go out of that lane. Like she would listen to the Backstreet Boys, which I enjoyed, and then she had this CD that was just Grammy nominees from 2004. It had Clocks on it, and I really liked that song and I really enjoy it. Just I look back on that the stuff that was on that very fondly because at the time it was just like an escape from the really boring Christian music that we were typically listening to. And then I remember listening to X and Y after that, and enjoying that as well, like Speed of Sound and Fix You and all that. And then I kind of fell off a little bit after that with like Viva La Vida. Never really listened to. I, of course, New Life and Technicolor 2. Actually, I had the Grammy nominee album from 2010 as well. Weirdly, that was the other Grammy nominee album we had, and that had Life and Technicolor 2 on it, which I did like. But I never listened to that album all the way through. I think part of that was because Rolling Stone gave it like 3.5 stars, so it seemed like maybe it was like a big step down from the ones before that. And then Milo Xyloto came out while I was in high school. And I remember listening to like some of that stuff. And it's possible maybe I even did listen to that album all the way through and just don't remember it very well. But I definitely remember, Paradise was the big hit off of it. I definitely remember that. And Every Teardrop is a Waterfall. Like basically the stuff that you would expect. But I don't think I ever really digested it. And then I was just totally out after that. I didn't listen to Ghost Stories, Head Full of Dreams, Everyday Life, Music of the Spheres. I didn't listen to none of those albums. And then last year I came back and I listened to Moon Music. And part of that was I was like I was just kind of interested in or checking out the albums that were new that year. And I was like, oh, Coldplay. I used to listen to them a lot when I was a kid and really enjoyed them. And then I also found I was just became so fascinated with Coldplay because I realized that they're the top band on Spotify. Like if you just go to monthly listeners, Coldplay are the most popular band on Spotify, and they have been ever since that I have known that you could find this metric. If I have this save the Spotify top artists by monthly listeners, and it's like constantly updated. And every time I look at it, I'm looking at it now. Coldplay has never not been in the top 10. Right now, they're number nine. They're with 94 million monthly listeners. And everybody that above them is just a solo artist. You have Lady Gaga, Ed Sheeran, Rihanna, Ariana Grande, Taylor Swift, Justin Bieber, Bruno Mars, The Weeknd. And it's like Coldplay is the most popular band in the world. And I just was kind of amazed by that because I was like, well, Coldplay, they were popular when I was a kid. Like how is this still what people are listening to? And they had the big viral moment earlier this year where they had that CEO, that crappy CEO was like cheating on his wife or whatever, and like they blew it up on the jumbotron, and it was like kind of this moment that everybody in America just kind of pointed at and laughed. And so they were sort of top of mind anyway, but I listened to mood music before that. Like just when I was in 2024 last year, I was just like, and they're even then they were the most popular band. And I listened to Moon Music and I was really impressed. I was like, wow, this is a great album. I was surprised. It was very different from the Coldplay that I grew up with. It wasn't like kind of like these sad piano ballads or acoustic ballads. It was very upbeat, extremely poppy, very I don't know, like almost like unbelievably enthusiastic. Like it's so positive, very positive. Like they were just kind of trying to be like this positive force, I guess. Very interesting direction that they took. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna listen to. I was at least gonna listen to like the big Coldplay albums, like the ones from my childhood, Parachutes, Rush of Blood to the Head, X and Y. And I did. So on November 10th, I actually listened to both Parachutes and A Rush of Blood to the Head back to back, and really enjoyed them. They're both great albums. I like the Rush of Blood to the Head a little bit better than Parachutes, but enjoyed them both immensely. And then I was like, well, I'll hit X and Y while I'm here because I remember listening to that when I was a kid. And I'm so sure that I listened to X and Y. I actually didn't count it as a new album because I know I listened to X and Y all the way through at one point in my life. So I listened to X and Y on November 20th. Really enjoyed that one as well. Just like almost equal with the Rush of Blood to the Head. And I was like, well, you know what? I'm really enjoying this. Let's do Viva La Vida, which I wasn't sure I was going to listen to. And then I listened to Viva La Vida. And I was like, this is the best one yet. Which is not what I was expecting at all. Because there's the song Viva La Vida, which is a great song, but it's kind of like up there. If you listen to Bob Seger and you're listening to old time rock and roll, it's like I don't ever need to listen to that song again. That's kind of how I feel about a lot of it. Yellow I do think is timeless, but and the clock I think is fairly timeless. X and Y, the stuff on that is timeless. Viva La Vida is the first time where I was like, okay, I don't think I ever really need to listen to bum 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 over and over again, or like ever again. 'Cause I just heard it so many times. But I actually really did enjoy the rest of that album. I was really surprised by it, and it was kind of more artsy than the other ones I felt like, where they were kind of mixing songs together into singular tracks, and I didn't expect that. It was much more grand in its production than I expected. It was more expansive than any of their albums before that. I was like, wow, Viva La Vida, really great. And so then I was like, you know what? Let's listen to Milo Xyloto, which I did, and I enjoyed it a lot. I don't, it was definitely a step back from Viva La Vida. This is kind of it felt like maybe a little bit of the beginning of the more pop direction that they ended up really nailing with Moon Music. And so I enjoyed it, and I was like, you know what? There's not that many left between here and Moon Music, which I wasn't gonna listen to again because I didn't need to hear it again after hearing it last year. And I was like, let's just do it. Let's just run the gamut here and listen to the rest of them. So actually, the same day I listened to Milo Xyloto, I listened to Ghost Stories. And Ghost Stories was an album I'd like never even heard of before. And this was clearly, as soon as you start listening, it's like, oh, this is a breakup album. This is something that Chris Martin was going through. And it turns out, yes, in fact, he wrote this while he was getting his divorce from Gwyneth Paltrow. I listened to it at night, which I think was a big part of the appeal of it. And I actually listened to it while I was driving, which I try to avoid doing, but it was just me in the car by myself, so I was able to focus on it pretty good. So just like driving at night from my mother-in-law's house, I was like, wow, this is a really cool album. I would put it low, rank it low in terms of just like all their albums overall. It's a very pared back, minimalist album, but there's some really, really good stuff on there, and I enjoyed how different it was from the stuff that they did before. At this point, I was like, I'm really impressed by the variety of the Coldplay. Like Parachute's very acoustic, more in that Radiohead sort of vein. Rush of Blood to the Head was where they were kind of, especially X and Y. That was where they're getting kind of more into like the U2 sphere, where they were going for like the anthemic pop hits. Then Viva La Vida was like more of an art album. And then Milo Xyloto was back to sort of like pop. And then Ghost Stories was like totally pared back, really minimalist album, almost like Kanye's 808s and Heartbreak, which I was really impressed by. Then we went to A Head Full of Dreams on November 23rd, and really, that was like basically Moon Music, but worse, where it was like super enthusiastic, and, just positive and that kind of thing. That was, I thought, their worst album, but still solid. Like one thing I was amazed by up to this point, even through Head Full of Dreams, I was like, Coldplay has not done a bad song in any of these albums. And even with the Head Full of Dreams, which I just thought was clearly their worst, I was like, still nothing on there was bad. Just like, a lot of songs that didn't are not stand out. And I was kind of expecting that to be sort of the level that they were at for the rest of the time. I was like, they're probably going to be kind of at this level. These last two albums before Moon Music are probably not going to be as good. And you know what? I got to say I was wrong. Everyday Life is like this very experimental album, definitely their most experimental album. And some of the best Coldplay music I ever heard was on Everyday Life from 2019. And I really appreciated how different it was from A Head Full of Dreams, and how much of a departure it was. I was like, wow, this is really impressive. And then Music of the Spheres is definitely more in the Mune music vein. It's more in like the big pop anthems with positivity. But it's like more of a spacey vibe where ugh, I hate to say the word vibe, but it kind of has, it creates this atmosphere of space. And on Spotify, I really liked how they actually had like a different. It was like each song was associated with a different sphere because like if you look at the album, it's like a bunch of different planets and like each song it sort of corresponds with a different one on there, which I think is really clever. And I actually really enjoyed that kind of like spacey atmosphere to it. And it ended up being one of my favorites was Music of the Spheres, which is definitely not what I expected. Like none of them were really like blow you away songs, but they were really really good songs on Music of the Spheres. And so that was a really fun experience to listen to that. And so I came away from this experience just listening to all this Coldplay and just being really impressed and just they were already I would have put them among the great artists of all time, but now I think they're like truly one of my favorites ever. Like even above, I would never would have dreamed to put them above like a Radiohead or even a U2 and in the past, but now I think not only are they on the level of those bands, like they might be better. I think I am ready to say that I like them better than Radiohead at this point. Do I think they're better than U2? It's a closer one, but and to be fair, there's quite a few U2 albums I haven't heard all the way through either, and maybe that would be a good artist deep dive, like what I've done over the course of this year. But right now, I'm just super high on Coldplay, and I'm very pleased. It just makes me happy that they are the most popular band on Spotify. I think that they deserve it. Like it is out. They do make music that can appeal to anybody, and I've just been very impressed by that. So, yeah, high marks for Coldplay. And I listened to them really in a much more condensed span of time. It's a similar number of albums, but I listened to them a very condensed span of time compared to Bob Seger, where it took me a couple months to really get through it. Where as with Coldplay, it was like November 10th, I listened to Parachutes. By November 27th, I listened to everything they had on Spotify. I did skip some live albums because I actually have quite a few live albums on Spotify, and I was like, I don't want to dig that deep, but I bet they're great. Quite frankly, and maybe one of these days I will go back and listen to those live albums. But for now, I decided I was going to move on, and so just the last couple albums that I've listened to before I recorded this podcast. November 28th, I listened to Interstate Gospel by the Pistol Annies. Great country album. I knew that it was going to be good. Pistol Annies is sort of like a super group between Miranda Lambert and Ashley Monroe, and then there's this other woman who I've never heard of, and I can't remember her name off the top of my head. Um, and it's like a trio. Really great. They have great voices. Their voices sound really amazing together. Great, like depressed country music, which is the best country music, quite frankly. Like when it comes to country music, get the positivity out of here. We don't want to hear about how great it is growing up with your good old boys and beer. We want to hear about your heartbroken, your girl loved you, and your dad ran over your dog and all that. That's what we want to hear. The Jamie Johnson class of country music and Interstate Gospel is that big time, but for women. But really great stuff. The only song from this album I knew going in was "The Best Years of My Life," which I think is one of the all-time great country songs ever written. And there was some other stuff on there that I wouldn't put quite on that level, but that was also very good. So really enjoyed that album. And then the last album I listened to so far this year, and I will listen to more albums this year, but I decided I was going to do this podcast today because I just with everything going on in my life, I just haven't had time to put together a more curated podcast. But last album I listened to, and I listened to it yesterday, was Live in New York City by Bruce Springsteen. And this was like the live album that they did in 2001 in New York. Kind of a famous run of shows that they did there. This is on the I think the big finale for the reunion tour of the E Street Band. And just an amazing, amazing live album. A lot of very interesting songs, and not only songs but versions of songs that you would expect. I think my favorite live album of all time that I've ever heard, I listened to last year, which was the reunion tour for Bruce Springsteen and the Street Band. I was really just amazed how good they were, and coming back after 10 years, they were just so energetic, and I really enjoyed that they weren't just playing the hits. They were really just like that tour. They were picking a lot of songs that was about brotherhood and companionship, which is what the E Street Band was all about coming back. And that was really cool. Live in New York City, though, this was a lot more of a political concert. This is when they did famously 41 Shots, American Skin, when they were told not to. Yeah, and it was like written in protest to the killing of an unarmed black man at that time. And that was really cool. And I knew that performance, and it's an amazing performance of that song. But listening to that album all the way through is really cool because like they still have their fun, of course. It's a E Street Band performance. You're not just gonna be kind of downers the whole time, but it was really a lot more in like that political vein where they were hitting a lot of stuff from Nebraska. They were hitting stuff from Born in the USA, including Born in the USA, but where he did it in an acoustic way, where it was like kind of the more the original Nebraska version of it, which I don't like anywhere near as much of as the actual version that he put out. I think the big part of the magic of Born in the USA is that's a really dark song, but with put through like this upbeat tone that makes you sort of overlook it, where a lot of people don't even realize what it's about. I still like that better than sort of like the dark acoustic version, but that's what they did here, and that was really interesting and probably the right call for this period. But yeah, having them do stuff like Mansion on a Hill is like, wow, they are really digging deep into that catalog for this show. And there was stuff that I never heard on that in that performance, and I was really impressed by it. So it's definitely up there with his greatest live works. I wouldn't put it on the level of the reunion tour. I wouldn't put it on the level of like that just great live compilation that he ever the first one they ever put out from 75 to 85. But it's up there on that tier, like truly like an S tier live album that I really enjoyed. So I'm kind of coming off of a high listening to that yesterday. That's it. Those are the 84 albums that I listened to in 2025. 30 of them were new to me anyway. And yeah, I skipped out on 2020 actual 2025 music this year. But I just still I feel like I just had a very rich and fulfilling year of music. Definitely, I listened to way more music this year than I did last year. And I really enjoyed it. And the podcast is part of that because it inspired me to do the top 500 songs, which obviously it's basically complete, but I'm nowhere near like actually publishing it. But the top 100 artists is very very close to being published, and I do plan on getting it out before the end of the year. And so I that has been fun and has inspired me to listen to a lot of these albums. And it's just been fun listening to all this music, reconnecting with music that I haven't listened to in a long time, and listening to a lot of new stuff along the way, and really diving deep into some artists that I knew that I would like diving deep into, but actually doing it, making the time for it, has been really rewarding. So I recommend you do that. If you're listening to this podcast, I hope you're inspired to listen to some more albums. Don't just listen to your favorites on Spotify on repeat. Broaden your horizons, listen to more albums, and you will be rewarded. I promise you. So, but that's it for my discussion on the albums just the music that I listened to in 2025. It was a mixed year for me personally, but a great year for me musically. So very rich and fulfilling year for me for listening to music. So I will go back and finish. I haven't obviously forgotten about the top 100 artists of all time. I've just got about 10 entries left that I need to write up. Particularly once I get I've only got a couple weeks of work left for the holiday break. And I'm gonna have a couple weeks off, so that's gonna be really great. And I'm really looking forward to that. But granted, a lot of that's gonna be filled up with spending time with family and everything. But I am planning on getting the top 100 artists out by that time if I haven't finished it before that. And then Reagan and we've been planning a podcast where we're gonna do because I have finished the third Song of Ice and Fire book. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's a Storm of Swords, but I can't remember for sure which one it is. It's called. It's on my head. But I read that, finished that, and also we read through all of the short stories that George R. R. Martin wrote for Duncan the Tall in this compilation called Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is what they're making a show about. HBO this year or 2026. Really enjoyed that as well. And so I have like an updated list of my book version of the Game of Thrones characters that Reagan actually hasn't heard. She's going to be reacting to them live on the show. So that's going to be fun. That maybe we'll have that in time for next week. We'll see. But a lot of music stuff to come. And then I think I'll also probably do another podcast just sort of talking about other things I did this year, the movies I watched. 'Cause I actually did watch a fair bit of films this year as well. And the video games I played this year, of course, and things like that. So we'll have some more fun end of the year discussions coming up in the weeks ahead on the podcast. But for now, thank you for listening. Just remind you that if you want to write into the show, you can at ControlledBurnes with an ES at gmail.com. If you like it, you can subscribe, follow, like, review wherever you listen to your podcasts. But for now, and until next time, keep it warm.